Hello, everybody. We've got some people coming into the room, which is fantastic. Seeing the numbers go up. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a bit and just wait for the participants to fill up. Or hopefully we'll get a number of people coming along today. And meanwhile, we're waiting. It'd be really great to kind of get an idea of who's actually on the webinar today. So if you could click either one of these. So what brought you here today? Are you an aspiring trustee? Are you already a trustee, or are you looking to recruit trustees? So just pick which one you are. Maybe you fit one of those, maybe you don't. But it'd be great to see who is joining us today. So just select which one. That'd be fab. Just going to wait a bit more whilst the numbers go up. Because someone who said none of the above, I'm afraid. Not to worry at all. Elaine, it would be lovely to know what brought you here as well, whilst we're waiting anyway. Fab. We'll just wait a few more minutes. Welcome, everybody. Professional writer with a particular interest in the third sector. So welcome, Elaine. Obviously, everybody welcome, not a problem at all. It's really interesting to see different types of people who we do have here today. So welcome, thank you for joining us. For those who have just joined us, you will see a poll on the screen. If you're able to just answer which one you are, so are you an aspiring trustee? Are you already a trustee, or are you looking to recruit trustees? So what brought you here today? So just wait a few more minutes. Lovely. We've got some amazing speakers here with us today as well, which is fantastic. I'm really excited to hear from all of them as well. Lovely. So meanwhile, just say Elaine said, thank you so much. I'm also very interested in how diversity continues to be an issue for people from Black and ethnic minorities in lots of areas. So thank you, Elaine, again for joining us. I'm sure you're going to find out a lot about that into today's talk. So we might wait just another minute, and then I think we're going to get going. So if you haven't already, please vote on the poll. What brought you here today? I am an aspiring trustee. I'm already a trustee. I am looking to recruit trustees. And then we are going to get started. Lovely. Fab. Okay, so welcome everybody. Just before I get started, what brought you here today? So we've got a lot of aspiring trustees today. We've got 73% of people here today are trustees, 9% is already a trustee, and 18% are looking to recruit trustees. So that's really, really great. And I'm just really hoping you're going to have a lot to bring away with you today from the webinar. So amazing. So welcome. My name is Tanya, and I am a recruitment consultant who specialises in community and events roles at Charity People. So in this webinar, we will be discussing how to volunteer for charity leadership, especially for young people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. So trustees are key to the decision making of the charity. They are also responsible for making sure that the charity is run in the interests of the people it is there to support. Being a trustee can be a rewarding experience in which you can learn about new issues, become a better leader and learn new skills, which are extremely beneficial to an individual's personal development. Things such as decision-making, negotiating, thinking strategically, managing relationships and partnerships are loads of skills that you can learn from being a trustee. And it's also a great way to get your foot into the door of the charity sector. So individuals from Black and Asian backgrounds are significantly underrepresented on charity trustee boards. So only 8% of trustees are from Black and Asian backgrounds, and only 2.9% of trustees are Black and Asian women. This compares unfavourably with 14% of the England and Wales population being from Black and Asian backgrounds. Now, today we are joined by some magnificent speakers who I will come on to introduce, but together we aim to raise awareness and increase knowledge of the roles and responsibilities of charity trustees so that you walk away with advice about how to become a trustee or how to recruit trustees from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups into your organisation. Trustees play a key role in the leadership of charities and offer great opportunities for people to play a vital volunteering role in their communities. So a quick brief run through of how the events of today will unfold. First, Malcolm is going to run through very interesting findings from the Action for Trustee Racial Diversity report. We'll then move on to questions for the panel in regards to becoming a trustee, that should bring us to around 1 o'clock. And feel free to add comments in the chat box about anything that may interest you. And finally, we will have some time at the end for the panel to answer any questions from you, the audience. So if you think of anything you wish to ask throughout the session, please write in a question box, not the chat box, and we will try and get through as many as possible at the end. So now I'm going to take it to the panel. So I'd love for you all to introduce yourself. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm just going to go around, and if you'd just like to introduce yourself. So Malcolm, hello.
Hi, thanks Tanya. I'm welcome all, glad to see you all here. I'm Malcolm John, and I'm the founder of a campaign called Action for Trustee Racial Diversity, of which you'll hear more a bit later on. I'm also a trustee of the Association of Chairs, which is the support body for chairs in England and Wales. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Mita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Mita. I manage the Young Trustees movement. I became a trustee at 21 and a chair at 25. I'm just really excited to be in this special space. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mita. We also used to work together, which is lovely. So it's nice being back together. Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Hello there, everyone. My name is Michael Abiodun Olatokun, and I'm currently working with Mita as part of the Young Trustees movement, where I'm coordinating a London-based campaign to help you, the aspiring and current trustees, to show and evidence and highlight the skills that you've got to be seen by charity leaders and recruiters who may have a very different conception of what a trustee is, but to help them know that you should and could be it. I'm also currently a trustee of Law for Life and the Diner Award, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Michael. And finally, Ambreen.
Should have been prepared. So I'm Ambreen Shah. I am a new to the trustee world. I guess I became a trustee at the end of 2020 for a small organisation called the Small Trust, which is a foundation that supports women around financial resilience. And prior to that, I guess I've worked in the charitable sector for almost 20 years. But it's the opposite of Mita. It took me a while to become and get into the trustee world. So keen to hear more and share experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambreen. And thank you again, all of you, for joining us. Really excited about today. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Malcolm now. Malcolm, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. Hi, guys. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, perhaps 11, about the campaign that I founded over 2 years ago, which was originally a short-term project lasting a few days, and more than 2 years later, I'm wondering where is my exit strategy. So, and can I thank charity people, particularly for supporting this webinar and for supporting the campaign over the last year or so, which I've been really grateful. Tanya's already said what's a trustee, and just to reinforce that, yeah, they don't run the day-to-day stuff of the charity. That's the chief exec and her staff who do that. In terms of time, it can vary enormously from probably half a day a month to 2 days a month, depending on the circumstances of the charity. Some charities actually only meet twice a year, and some meet every month. So again, there's no guarantee of how much time that's going to be. Tanya gave some stats earlier about the sector, which actually are quite shocking and quite underwhelming. To repeat those, I think that's important. 8% trustees are from Black and Asian backgrounds, and that compares to 14% in England and Wales population. So that's a huge underrepresentation of 6%, which is enormous. And then look at the numbers. Women of colour only make up 20,000 of 700,000 trustees. So it's incredible. In terms of young trustees, and I'm sure Mita and Michael can tell you much more later, but there are only 0.5% of young trustees at 18 to 24, which is 3,500 people out of 700,000 trustees. So I think you can work out for yourself that in terms of Black and Asian trustees, the number boils down to about 280, which is your young trustee, which is absolutely absurd. So I think there's scope to do so much better on that basis. A bit about me. I've been a bit of a serial trustee over the last 20 years. Yeah, I know. And I've sat on 7 or 8 charity boards in that time, from small to large. And more often than not, I've been the only Black and Asian trustee on those boards. And I think where occasionally there have been others, they've tended to leave for a variety of reasons, largely, I think, because they felt not included. So inclusion is a key part of changing the stats around racial diversity on trustee boards. It's also true to say that most of my trusteeships have come from my own personal and professional networks, which is not in the best interest of diversity and inclusion. They're clearly worked out in my own favor, but not desirable. So the campaign, I started, as I said, about 2 years ago. And it's when I left my penultimate charity, which was an international development charity. I was on the board for 7 years, and the last 3 years I was the vice chair. And when I left, there were no Black or Asian trustees left on the board, which for an international development charity working on social injustice across the globe is totally unacceptable. And it wasn't that the charity didn't realize diversity was important, but it was always something else which took priority, whether it was finance or staffing or organizational issues. So I offered to help them to recruit up to 3 Black and Asian trustees. No point just recruiting 1 or even 2. You need to change the dynamic. You need that mass. So the chair and the CEO were supportive, which is essential. And we were successful in recruiting 3 high-quality Black and Asian trustees by specifically saying that's what we wanted and why we wanted to do that. And I guess it was whilst doing that, I realized the issue across the sector. And so it brought home to me quite starkly the gap between the rhetoric about diversity and the numbers on the ground. So I decided to draw on my own networks, experience, and personal commitment to try and see what I could do to address the imbalance and explore some practical options, solutions. So the campaign wants to achieve bridging that gap from 8 to 14%. And we want to, which means recruiting another 100,000 Black and Asian trustees by 2020, another 10,000 by 2026, which is about 2,000 a year in the next 5 years. It's not unachievable given the 168,000 charities. And there are 2 key things that we're doing. One is we're going to produce this year a practical guide on how to recruit Black and Asian trustees. And hopefully it will come out around about July, but these things do tend to slip, but I've got my fingers crossed about that. And since last year, a lot of organizations are keen to take active steps to address racial disparities, but more often than not, they actually don't know how to go about doing it. The second key thing the campaign will be doing is developing a unique database, which is currently over 500 Black and Asian network organizations across sectors. So there's corporate sector, charity sector, student sectors, and across the UK. And actually, we've now got over 50 Black and Asian student networks on the list. And clearly, every university has got a range of Black and Asian networks, so there are a lot more that we can add onto that list. And what the database does is that it highlights that actually there are thousands of Black and Asian people out there with skills, experience, and commitment to be effective and valuable trustees. But it does require the sector to show a high degree of resources, commitment, and prioritizing themselves if they're going to achieve effective change. Updates so far on the campaign. We got a grant from the Co-op Foundation, which is a brilliant support from them to help us to produce the guide and to carry on the work. And the need for the work, every week I get emails from chairs or CEOs who approach us for advice and support. And they started by saying, we are an all-white board and. So, and that I see that quite a lot. Our two recent initiatives are, we're talking about lived experience, which is about bringing to trustee boards, and Ambreen will hopefully tell you a bit more about that. People with actually lived experience of the issues that charities are dealing with. So who aren't your serial trustees, who aren't professional people, but actually who can help the charity become more effective and more efficient and more reflective of its communities. The second thing we're doing is to make sure that the voices of Black and Asian individuals with potential, like you guys, to become trustees, or who are already first-time trustees, are heard and listened to. So we launched quite recently, as Tanya said earlier, a social media network for potential and current Black and Asian individuals, primarily so that you can learn about the responsibilities of trustees, you can share and learn from each other about experiences as trustees or potential trustees, and thirdly, you can explore the barriers and challenges that exist, both for Black and Asian individuals as well as for recruiters. So I end by highlighting for discussion later, for me, three key barriers around racial diversity in the sector. One is, I think, the lack of knowledge and confidence of people from Black and Asian backgrounds to apply for trusteeships. And I think that's why a lot of you guys are here today. The lack of knowledge of charities on the supply side, how to go about achieving board racial diversity. And finally, not enough prioritizing of diversity and inclusion by charities. I'll stop there and I shall look forward to our further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. It's so interesting and also really good news to hear that you have that funding from the Co-op Foundation to give you that boost that we need. But yeah, just those figures are just astonishing. I can't believe it. But yeah, that's why we're here today, and hopefully this will be the sort of springboard that we need to get the ball rolling. So our first question, which I'm going to ask our fabulous speakers today, what do you think are some of the benefits for charities who have a diverse board of trustees? And Mita, I'm going to bring that question to you first.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting question, and actually starting with like, what is the point of a board is really important, because having a diverse board is not a nice to have, it's an essential functioning of a healthy board. And actually what is normal is not okay. So the statistics that Malcolm mentioned are actually shocking when we think about that charities need to be able to manage risk. In order to manage risk, you need a diversity of perspectives. If you don't have a diversity of perspectives, that massively lowers your ability to do that, which is why ecclesiastical, an insurance firm who has nothing to do with generally like wider diversity, through its focus groups with lots of people, figured out that diversity on boards is really important for managing risk. It's also really important for the role of accountability in terms of a trustee board. If you can't see if you only have one type of person reflected on a board, how is that organization going to be accountable to the wider community? Also, we have this sense that like there's this myth that a trustee board is meant to have these like this magical knowledge that guides an organization, and I think that's one of the biggest things that can be busted of what a trustee does. Like, it's not meant to have all of the answers, but it's meant to be asking really helpful questions in order to keep the organization accountable. And if we don't have that diversity on board, we're missing those diversity of perspectives to really keep the organizations and charities accountable and be able to best serve the interests of their mission. So there is like basically a diverse board, a board that is reflective of the community, is an essential part and running of a trustee board. And if we haven't got that right, we haven't got the core function of what a board does right. So we basically need everybody, every aspiring young trustee. You are massively needed in the functioning of a healthy board.
Thank you, Mita. Breen?
Yeah, I mean, Mita said it so well. And the only thing that I would add to that in some ways is that I was at an event recently and somebody said it's not just the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do. And it's the smart thing to do because there is evidence actually that is now beginning to grow about the importance of diversity of boards and the impact that it has. So McKinsey in the business context have found that absolutely having diversity throughout your workforce, including at the senior levels, absolutely leads to a competitive advantage and is an enabler of growth. And that's no different for the charitable sector. So in addition to thinking about, and I've been in environments where if you consciously go out and be inclusive and get a range of perspectives around a table, actually you do have more creative solutions coming up. You do think differently about the problem and you are essentially making better decisions. So I think, yes, it's important to see people, diversity on boards, but it's not just about seeing, it's about the skills and the interactions that happen and the better decision making, quite frankly, that takes place as a result. So I think it's really important.
Thank you. Michael?
I'm not sure I could have added anything to the discussion, so I'll leave it to my learned colleagues.
Sorry, Michael?
Yeah, I'm not sure I had anything to add, so I'll deal with the next question rather than adding any more to this one.
Yeah.
Of course. Thank you. Malcolm, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, again, I think diversity avoids people all thinking the same. And there's something called collective blindness, where people tend to agree with everybody else because actually they come from the same background, they think the same, and they don't want to be seen to be different. And there's always talk about having a deviance, constructive deviance on board, so people who actually challenge the status quo, and they're really important because they're the people who actually get things to think differently and to change things because they're challenging where boards already have been. So I think just bringing in that different perspective is really important. Yeah.
Amazing. And I'll bring this question to you, Michael. Why were you interested in becoming a trustee?
I think that many of the themes that the others have discussed are very important for me. Seeing a sector that didn't have many Black leaders and thinking there's something not quite right here, as someone who was entering the charity sector and the voluntary sector and wanted to do big things in it. The lack of representation for me was one of the motivating factors for wanting to persuade other young black men to think, I could be on the board of a charity, I could be the sort of person who makes strategic decisions about voluntary movements and whatnot. And it taps into a wider issue, which wasn't covered in Tony Sewell's race report, which was around a chronic underrepresentation of black and brown faces across the public sector, across civic life more broadly, in institutions of power like Parliament, etc., etc. Those areas are actually slightly better than charity boards for black representation, but they are still heavily underrepresenting. And I think that in my work around citizenship and youth engagement is potentially a link between the conversations around the table where people get told, Abiodun, you must become a doctor or a lawyer, but there's never a narrative around, could you be on the board of a charity? Could you get involved with this local group? And I think when we start to see more people from ethnically diverse backgrounds represented on boards in 2 or 3 generations, that is going to see the high-ranking professional occupation that is often so highly vaunted and people are pushed towards, put alongside trusteeship as one of the great things that you can do for your community that people should be encouraged from an early age to do. So me wanting to be a trustee partly was about making this an opportunity that I would recommend to my friends and family members and perhaps children as a potentially important way to contribute to society. I was also minded by one of the things that Malcolm said and the recommendations and conclusions of the McKinsey report that Ambrin was talking about, to think about a bit of Harvard research as well, where they looked at group decision making amongst groups with high IQs and found that IQ was not a helpful indicator of how well the group would perform, but rather it was the diversity of the group itself, because the groups that had the people drawn from the same areas, same expertise, were less likely to have a challenging discussion, more likely to fall into groupthink, whereas those that had different elements were challenging each other and the quality of the end decision was much better, which I think is really the sort of environment that I love to be involved in as a trustee, or to observe if I'm supporting a trustee board, because I know it's going to make sure that no one leaves the room with a bugbear about the charity's approach. It's going to make sure that the wrinkles in implementation that the people who you're actually working for are going to experience are smoothed out, because there are discussions with people with lived experience of, well, that wouldn't work in my community, but maybe if you add this. And I think the experiences that I have had, though I think this is not always one of the things that we sell when talking about trusteeship, those experiences have really personally developed me in a really profound way that I simply could not have got through my ordinary job. And whether it's for the apple pie of doing good for the community and acting in the public interest, or if we're saying that young people from ethnically diverse backgrounds are missing out on something in their careers as a result of the fact that many of them are not becoming trustees, I think we need to use whatever the most compelling arguments are, even if sometimes it might sound a bit seedy and self-interested. And I would love to see, for example, the careers advisors in colleges and schools, universities, all sorts of educational institutions, talking about young trusteeship as something that can be thrown into the mix of post-16 opportunities for people to get involved in. There's a very small number of 16 to 18-year-old trustees who require a special dispensation from the Charity Commission to be trustees. As Malcolm and Mita have said, 18 to 25-year-olds really underrepresented. And then I think you're looking at 2.5% of trustees aged 25 to 30. We are the generation who grew up with iPhones in our cradles. We have a general level of social media ability that's greater than previous generations. And a lot of organizations are trying to think about, in this new normal with this coronavirus that has forced us all to be on Zoom for so many hours in a day, of how technology can be used for good. I think that there is something innate about young people born in that generation who would be most able to guide a board to deal with that sort of new digital environment, but sadly we're not on the boards. And all of that is part of the reason why I've loved being a trustee, I've wanted to be one, and continue to encourage others to do the same.
Thank you so much, Michael. Ambreen, bring the question to you. Why were you interested in becoming a trustee?
Yeah, just following on from what Michael said, really, it just made me think that, I guess, before I became a trustee, or before I became more aware of what trustees did, I mean, the motivation was clearly this lack of representation, which we've talked about. We've talked about the absolutely abysmal statistics around that. So there was that general background of, actually, if I don't step forward, or someone like me doesn't step forward, then when are we going to change that? And actually, I do have I'm not a young trustee. I wish I was, but I'm not. But I've got years of experience behind me. So someone like me can't do it. Then when are we going to change that leadership at the top? There is something about that sort of responsibility that I felt anyway. But the thing that prevented me, I guess, was partly because in my mind, and I don't know if others think this, but in my mind, trustees were people with great connections, little black books that knew people, that went to certain schools, that could bring something to that leadership where they could help the organisation progress. So that's what I created in my mind about what a trustee group, because to be honest, I've reported to boards, and they're the types of people that sat around those boards. They were pretty rich, pretty privileged, and had the luxury of the ability to give up their time to sit on boards, because actually they'd made enough money in their time to be, or were comfortable enough to be able to give that time and not dedicate it to full-time work. Whereas I was commuting to London, I've got 2 kids, I did have a full-time job, so it was, so I think it's all of those conditions. And actually, just going back to what Mita said, Mita talked about, actually it's not, perhaps the environment is changing, it's not that anymore. It's about, can I ask the right questions? So can I sit around that table and not worry about, am I well connected, but can I challenge and support the organisation to be better, and to be better in the way it does things and how it does things and its reach? And if the answer is yes, then step forward is what I'd say. So in some ways, my interest in becoming a trustee is about recognizing that, feeling the responsibility to do it, having the time to do it. As I said, I'm not working full-time currently, but I also now feel that the conditions are right, in terms of, I feel like certainly since the Black Lives Matter movement, as it were, if I call it a movement, is that since then, I think there has been a bit more of an honest reflection from the foundation world, from the charity world, to go, well, hold on, we've talked about this stuff for a long time, but have we done it in any meaningful way? Probably not. And it feels like now people are really challenging themselves to go, hold on a minute, we can't continue with the status quo. We need to change this. And part of that dialogue is thinking about, what do we do with our boards and foundation boards and trustees. And so I felt that the conditions were right, that people were genuinely now looking for a diversity of perspectives in the way that perhaps they haven't been before. So I guess for me, that's an important invitation in to say that if I do apply, I'm going to be joining an organisation that genuinely wants to have a different conversation, and I can support them to do that. Yes. So I guess those are those reasons.
Brilliant, thank you, Ambreen. So the next question is, what advice would you give to someone interested in becoming a trustee? And Ambreen, I'm actually going to start with you again.
So I was thinking about this, and I suppose the question for me is, where does your passion lie? So it's a very personal question to people. So where does your passion lie? What do you care about? And there will inevitably a number of organisations that work in that space. So I guess for me, the first thing is to go with your heart, to go with what really excites you, what really gets to you, and you think, God, it shouldn't be this way, and find out where those organisations are. Talk to them. So don't be scared. I think the thing about a trustee role, I've applied for a trustee role and it felt like applying for a job, but the key difference that it has, the key difference for me is that you are judging them as much as they are judging you. You need to find you need to build a relationship. So you've got to think that you've got something to offer them as well as they have something to offer you, because quite frankly, you're giving up your time. So that's got to be valued as well, and you're giving it up for free. So have the conversation. Don't see something and go, oh, I'll just apply for that cold. If it's got a recruiter, call the recruiter, have a conversation, find out about it. One that I went for recently, I actually said, well, actually, you're all white, you're a white organization. It's really clear to see that. I don't want to join it and then feel like I don't fit, that don't have the confidence to speak, because actually all the people on this board are very different to the world that I come from. So I asked if I could speak to the chair, because the chair has a really important role to play to set the right conditions for the way you might interact on that board. And they're like, okay. So before I made this decision to apply, I spoke to the chair and said, all right then, what are your plans? Why do you want to diversify your board? What are you looking for? Don't be scared to have those conversations, because actually what you want to do is you want to make sure you go into an organization, speaking to Malcolm's point, where you feel included, where your voice is valued, where you feel that you can sit there and have the confidence to say what you think. Because often it's really hard when a bunch of people know each other, there is a set culture to be the newbie and to say what you think. But if, as a trustee, that's precisely the reason you are there. And that's not all on you. You have to have the conditions created to make you feel comfortable. So test it, check it out. So I'd say, don't be scared to have that conversation. And remember, it's a two-way relationship. It is sort of like applying for a job. There will probably be an interview. There'll probably be a let's go meet the others. But you are also giving up your time. You're gaining a lot as well, which I think we've touched upon, but you have to think about those dynamics. So I'd say, yeah, have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Amberine. So many good tips there. Mita.
In terms of some advice, yeah, I think just Amberine touched on all of those really well. As was said, like, organizations desperately need trustees and young trustees and more diversity, and it's actually all about asking yourself, in terms of being visionary, what is the board right for me? Does it have the conditions to enable me to thrive? And it's also your choice. If you're like, actually I'm out, that's fine. If it doesn't allow you to thrive, or you're like, actually I'm going to bring the chair and create change, that's fine. That's all your choice. And depending on where you are, in what stage of your life, what you feel comfortable with, and where your passions lie, will define what kind of trusteeship you take and what path you take. So yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Malcolm or Michael, do you have anything to add?
I think for me, I think the skills that you bring, again, I think Mita and Amberine have covered it. So you're bringing skills to them, and it's not them doing you a favor. So be confident about your skills and about how you can use that to change the way the organization operates. And slightly differing from Amberine, I don't think you necessarily need a passion. Sometimes it's about developing your career. And so if you feel you can develop, whether it's your skills, your IT skills, your communication skills, your leadership skills, by joining something that sounds to, or even your social and personal life, so something that sounds will add to your own life and career, then I think that's enough. I've actually just been asked to join an arts and theatre charity, and because I do that in my personal life, I love arts and theatre, so I decided that I will see what skills I can bring around governance, around diversity and inclusion to that particular charity. So I think it's about what you bring. Also, I think the time, make sure you know about time commitments. Again, younger people are not retired, unfortunately, for a lot of them. They've got to work. Charities have got to make sure that they hold meetings in times that they can do, and it's not overburdened. So all those things people have got to think about. So I think as Amberine said, check out the charity and make sure it's diverse and inclusive enough so that it fits your lifestyle as well as theirs.
Thank you. Okay, so we will go on to the next question. What do you think are the benefits to charities of recruiting young trustees? So Malcolm, I will ask you, come back to you.
Okay, I think Michael probably gave some good examples there already, and I'm sure he can add some more.
Definitely.
But I think it's about that diversity angle. So it's not just about recruiting young trustees, it's recruiting people who add something different to the organization and who bring different perspectives. So young people aren't homogenous. So they bring a range of skills, they bring a range of personality. They do bring, as Michael says, the iPhone generation. And yeah, and I occasionally struggle with Microsoft Teams just to show the level of my technicalities. But so they do bring that. But that's we don't want to pigeonhole young people in that sense. And yeah, so they bring finance skills, they bring a whole range of skills. So they're and I think and they change the dynamic of the board. So they avoid that groupthink that I mentioned earlier, where you're all from the same background and experience. And I think particularly from Black and Asian communities, there's a younger generation in those communities. So it behoves charities to reach out much more to those communities if they're looking to recruit younger trustees. I'll stop there.
Lovely. Mita, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think Malcolm and Michael and Amberine have said many things in terms of like the benefits of diversity of perspectives and the direct benefits of that brings. And in specifics to young trustees, it's because there is a lack of intergenerational perspectives on the board, and in this case particularly, less than 3% of trustees are under 30 and 0.5% of trustees are between the age of 18 to 24, as Malcolm mentioned. So there is a real lack of that diversity of perspectives. And as Malcolm had mentioned, it's not just in the space of like social media, it's also in the space of how do we diversify our income and all of those streams. Those are the real benefits of like having diversity of perspectives and being the whole sense of a trustee. So there are those direct benefits, which I'm sure Michael in his campaign it's very much about, so I'm sure he can speak more to that. But there's also the indirect benefits. Some of the biggest champions of young trustees come in when young people have been there at meeting 2, they've said maybe 2 words, people are like, oh my goodness, young trustees have revolutionized our board. And actually what's happened is currently, if we have these really stuffy boards where people come in and they put a face on and they're like, I'm going to pretend I know what I do because I probably should know what I'm doing, and everybody's thinking that, then they're more concerned with how they're appearing and how they're looking rather than the actual issues at hand. So a board who is really healthy and effective should be to say, I have no idea what's going on right now. Can someone just really clarify what's happening? I really don't understand these board papers, which is why I'm not inputting particularly in the finance area. Please may I have some training, or please may these the papers that I'm receiving be changed a bit so I can understand it better. That's a really good functioning board. And when young trustees come in and people are like, how can we make this accessible to our trustees? It transforms the board to make it accessible to everyone, which transforms governance. And so we're seeing this movement of real transformation and better governance. So that's really exciting to see. But again, as was mentioned before, you don't have to hold the burden of all of that responsibility. It's a whole board responsibility to create these changes to, as Amberine mentioned, to create the conditions to enable people to thrive on boards.
Fab. Anyone have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just to pick up on the whole thing about, it's quite hard, and I'm quite interested to see what Michael says about, if you think if you're the only young trustee or the only Black and Asian trustee, it's quite difficult, to find out, to talk to people where there's been a barrier in the first place. So how do you cross that barrier and get the confidence to do that in a world that you don't know? And so you need support, whether it's mentoring or shadowing, or somebody on the board, another experienced trustee, or the chair in particular, who ensures that actually the culture is inclusive for you, and and they manage board meetings, board papers, as Mita said, in a way that gives you confidence that you can ask questions. So that's quite tough. And I'm quite interested to hear from Michael. When you started, I'm sure you were probably the only young Black trustee.
Yeah.
So what were the challenges, and how did you actually overcome them?
Yeah, so I've been a trustee of 4 organisations, and some have done it, shall we say, better and more, more accessibly than others. And I think where there have been challenges, it's been where it is presumed that I will know what I'm doing when I go into something, rather than having been trained or briefed beforehand. And then you're in this really awkward situation of, I wasn't fully prepared to do this, and as a result of me already not being confident, I'm going to contribute even less because I wasn't put on board. And the ways that that's been managed better are where, as Ambreen suggested, before that first meeting or first major project, having had a conversation with either the chief executive or the chair to get to something that I think is not often discussed enough, which is the culture of the board. How do we work together? What are the expectations? How regularly might we be expected to speak in between meetings? And do you think I should have a full understanding of this paper, or are you going to provide a summary that I then take as the knowledge I should have about it? So I think these are very difficult spaces. They are very antiquated and are very much a relic of a way that things were previously done. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to be the first person to ask the gatekeeper, can I have half an hour so we can go through this? Or asking the treasurer or financial trustee, I don't quite get this. Can you rejig the paper so that I can make the decisions that I'm going to have to make with full accuracy and knowing what is actually involved? And I find that there is often great receptivity to doing that. As Mita said, once you make it more accessible for one trustee, it's more accessible and clearer for all others usually. And where there is resistance, that's a problem either of the culture of the board or of individuals within it. Separately, I also have asked for people's help from other organisations. Once I found myself thrust into the position of chair when a previous trustee decided they'd leave, and it was quite a tough situation that the charity was in, with quite heavy debts and outlets that weren't making as much money as they needed to. And I did need quite significant help from others, other chairs, other people who lead programs for organizational transformation and whatnot. And thankfully, this is a really supportive community, the voluntary sector. So I was able to pick up a couple of mentors who are more experienced at being chairs, ironically, who were from the establishment and were the Sir, Lord, KCMG, QC types, but they did help build me in terms of, this is how you inspire and influence, and this is where you're able to get people to do things that they really don't want to do for the sake of the organization. So I think there's something to be said about learning the rules of the game from those who made it, and getting mentors who are experienced is one of the things that's really helped.
Ambreen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of piggyback on what Michael said, and that, don't be scared to ask for a buddy. don't be scared to, whether it's from within the organisation, outside the organisation, of someone who is more experienced at doing those things, that you can just go prior to going into that board meeting. I mean, somebody said to me, the thing that you could do that's most valuable once you're in that space is to prepare. And prepare means, yes, read the papers, and if you don't understand something, have the conversations you need to have with the people that you want to have them with prior to stepping into that board meeting space. But yeah, having that buddy alongside you, and this could be at the point at which you're thinking of applying. I don't see why it should have to be at the point at which you've got a position, but someone that you admire, that that you think, they're the people that I admire. They're working for the type of organisation I want to to work with, and I value that person, the way they speak about things. LinkedIn is fantastic. You know, I think it's very rarely that you would go and sort of message someone and say, look, I'm an aspiring trustee, these are my ambitions, and I'd really like to learn from your experiences. That's really complimentary to the person that you're asking of, and 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10 they'll probably go, yeah, let's have a chat. So don't be scared to do that, I'd say, at this stage as well. And the other thing that, because we haven't mentioned it, I'll just mention it now, is this idea of shadowing. So in my role as a trustee for Smallwood, which is, as I said, a foundation that supports women, I decided I wanted to bring more people along with me that have lived experiences of some of the issues that Smallwood funds. So I created an opportunity whereby somebody could just shadow me, and together we would learn the ropes. I think the unintended consequence, or one of them, is that potentially I think it's a great way of succession planning. So this idea that one day you'll never been on a board, the next minute you apply and then you find yourself on one and go, what am I meant to be doing? That actually, is there a way of creating opportunities whereby you can shadow an existing trustee, where you don't have that pressure of being in a meeting and going, I have to say something and be worried about what you're going to say, but you just absorb the environment, demystify what it is, it becomes more transparent that actually it's not what, you know, it's not this impenetrable thing, that you have something to give to it. So while this isn't a scheme that runs across foundations, again, I would encourage you to find a trustee that you admire and knock on their door, say, can I shadow you? See what response you get, because I can't imagine it'll be in their gift to do it if they want to. So while I've implemented it because I thought it was a great thing to do for me, I would encourage you to knock on people's door and say, hey, this would be a good way for me to just experience what a board is like.
Yeah. So you've all got Ambrin's email address now. So make sure she's not too inundated. But I think just a couple of things.
Go ahead.
The Young Trustees Guide, I'm sure Mita there was a Charity Commission report actually, which mentioned, I think 7 years ago, a shadowing scheme for young trustees. And I actually don't think it's been implemented. And I think that that's been a big sort of shortcoming in the sector, that people have lots of great ideas, but unless somebody like Ambreen steps up and says, I'm actually going to do this, it's not done. And I think there is a role for the sector, the charity, people like us, to actually say, yeah, it's time this happens. And let's set up shadowing schemes like Ambreen's, and let's get it supported. And the Charity Commission, again, they don't ask for reporting, accountability, largely on equality, diversity, and inclusion issues, and they should do as part of the charity annual reports. And it will include whether you have a buddying scheme already, so that you don't have to go out and ask for one. The charity's already got one. Great. It may be a pipe dream, but I think that's where we really want to be going. Thanks.
Thank you, Malcolm. And so many good tips to come away with there as well. Thank you, everyone, so much. Now we are going to bring it to the audience for questions and answers. So we've had a few come through, but if you do have any questions and answers at this point, please put them in the question and answers box, not the chat box, in the Q&A box at the bottom. Just write it in there, and I'll get it through. So I'm going to ask the first question. So the first question is from Alexander. Have you established core personal values, and what are they? Does anyone want to take that question at all? Oh, yeah, Malcolm, lovely.
I have to start. Yeah, I was chair of the charity in Harrow, the Young Harrow Foundation, for 4 years, and I took over from a chair who actually was not a particularly good chair, and he and I did clash a couple of times over governance and over inclusion. So I eventually decided that I should be chair instead of him, and I was voted on. And I was keen to set out for the trustees what my values were. And so they were around diversity and inclusion, around transparency, around accountability, around visibility, and around listening and responding to the other trustees and to the staff who are part of the charity. So they were the ones that I set out publicly to say, this is what I want the organization to go. And it's quite a challenge for me to say that without ensuring that actually other people are going to follow that. But you've got to start somewhere. And I think the role of champions is really crucial in this particular area of work. So that's mine.
Thank you, Malcolm. Well, yeah, go ahead, Ambree.
I was happy to come in after Malcolm. Just to say that I sort of have, but I haven't made them public, which is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I haven't gone, this is the stuff that I care about, and maybe I should, so I'll think about that. But yeah, in my mind's eye, when I've joined the Smallwood Trust, I've thought about so in 3 years' time, what is the change that I personally want to have championed for that organisation? So I've asked myself that question and gone, well, actually, it is about bringing that lived experience more to the forefront of board decisions, to embed more anti-racist approaches to the way we do our work. So I've got like 3 or 4 things that I thought, not lots, just 3 or 4 core things, big things that I think, well, actually, this is the change that I want to see as a result of my contribution. And having written it down, it's something, because you forget, you know, a year in and you get bogged down with whatever detail that you got bogged down with. So just keep reminding yourself of the bigger change that you want to bring about. And I suppose, yeah, in that sense I have, but I haven't made them public, so I will think about that.
Thank you. Next question is from Elaine. I have volunteered extensively and worked professionally in the charity sector. There are lots of middle-class, middle-aged white males still making decisions, and I have found that sadly tokenism can be an issue. This can cause real frustration for people who are new to the sector. What issues do you think new members of the charity sector come up against?
There's quite a lot in that one.
To take that one. Yeah, there's quite a lot to pick apart in that one, isn't it?
Yeah. I think I'll answer the question at the end about the issues that new members of the charity sector come up against. And I think quite a lot of it's been alluded to already. There's often a bit of a hierarchical system where people with new ideas aren't necessarily taken seriously because of their level of seniority, and people, I think, aren't quite at the level where the corporate sector's at, where people who have the skills might be given responsibility or leadership responsibility for a project, even if they are very junior. So I think that might be something that causes frustration. I've always thought that the charity sector is very poor and very late as an adopter of anti-racism more generally. It's default mode where things are really tough to administrate, and there's a capacity crunch, can often mean that people's voices don't get heard if they have a particular approach that you want to take to something. And I think it's a bit of a symptom more broadly of ever squeezed budgets from funders who aren't funding core costs in the sector at the moment, that people do have quite a big capacity crunch as junior colleagues entering the charity sector. That's something I've noticed at a couple of the organisations I work at. So yeah, I think it's a tough time, but I think that makes the importance of the benefits that diversity would bring all the more prescient for this moment, as it can, as McKinsey have shown, lead to better financial performance and improved decision making. So I suppose if I were a new entrant, I'd be annoyed that if diversity were being put on the back burner, that people weren't taking a long-term view that it's something that is going to lead to net gains, even if it might mean an additional couple of hours of team thinking about how you might implement these sorts of things. Those are just some initial thoughts.
Thank you, Michael. And yeah, it's quite a tough one to sort of chip away at. So really appreciate you answering that. Malcolm, do do you have something to add?
Yeah, well, there are just so many issues, and I'll try and prioritize mine. I think the issues around what new members face, I think it's the status quo, and given the stats, and also the fact that I met chairs who've been chairs for over 20 years on boards, which is crazy. Things don't change under that sort of regime. So again, the issue about how long people be on boards, you need that throughput. A lot of charities don't have terms of reference in their members and arts, in length of terms of appointment. So that's key. And induction and training. People join boards and there's no induction plan, not until a year after you've joined. I was at a conference the other day where I think Pat Michael was there, where people say that actually it takes a year for a young trustee to get to terms with being on that board. So unless you start beforehand, which Amber shadowing, where you've got to run in, or it's intensive from the very beginning, supported by the chair, the trustees and senior staff, it is quite tough. So three things. On the tokenism thing, again, picking up on Michael's point, it's about having that discussion at the board about what diversity means realistically. And the stats we've already seen, diversity equals creativity, it equals productivity, it equals so much things which are beneficial to the organization. But unless you start a conversation, it's not going to happen, and people aren't going to pick it up and realize that actually they have to do it and put it at the center of the organization. I'll stop there, loads more, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Okay, I'll head to the next question. What are the best places to advertise for Black and Asian trustees, ideally with lived experience of disability?
Malcolm, do you want to go first?
A really good, I think it's quite an issue, disability. Again, similar to racial disparities, disability is usually underrepresented on charity boards. And there hasn't been a focus on, particularly on increasing that. And reach volunteering, I think, are probably one of the better volunteering trustee organizations nationally in the UK. And I know that they do have a pretty wide range of people who volunteer as trustees on that site. So if I was going to recommend, I would certainly recommend Reach Volunteering as somebody, if you were looking for disabled trustees, to post on that. But I think it's also about, similar to my network, about trying to reach out to disabled people with disability networks, mental health networks, because they do exist. They do exist, but often on a parallel plane to mainstream networks. So it's about really doing the research and not just following the usual networks that you hear about, but actually by doing the work yourself. Go on Google, go on LinkedIn, go on Facebook to try and reach out to more wide and more diverse networks.
Thank you.
I was just gonna, sorry, Tanya.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna add really quickly to that, to just really echo Malcolm's point on reaching out and making sure it's an accessible space and that you've done the work before the recruitment process and the recruitment process is accessible. So for instance, particularly with disability, if you're working with people who have sporadic appointments and they might come up, it's like, how do you ensure that you don't have to physically be in the room in order to contribute to what the charity is saying? So making sure that you have and you're communicating how your board is accessible, and then, as Malcolm said as well, reaching out to those groups and ensuring that your target audience is represented in the recruitment area. If it's in a small area, then lots of local groups are going to be really reflective of your organizations, and for larger areas, like having potentially like a national webinar and having someone chairing it from that community has been really effective, we found.
Fab. Thank you, Mita. That sort of blends into the next question, which was how honest can you be in your advertising that you are at the start of your journey to improve diversity and that you are specifically targeting underrepresented groups for specific roles, either trustee or other positions? How do you avoid discrimination to other interested candidates?
Yeah, I'd like a go at that question. I've been involved in a trustee recruitment process at the moment for an organisation that hasn't recruited them previously, and what we've done is we've put it within the wider strategic context of the organisation. We know that we have a real problem with people at the top of the organisation and the trustees and our advisors who are typically white men at the end of their careers who have made a lot of money and think that the vast majority of the rest of human experience is not represented, should be represented in order for us to open our organisation, work with more people, not miss opportunities, be able to divest ourselves from the opportunities that are either unethical or not working anymore. And we think having what we describe as a gender balance and people from more racial and ethnic backgrounds is going to help us do that. And then we've said, though we're open to people who can help us from all walks of life and all areas, and that's the way that we approach that. And I think, you know, this is a bit of a politically charged statement, but anybody who would not be attracted to an organisation that wants to do the right thing and make a positive difference and extend an opportunity to an underrepresented group may not be the sort of person who's going to be a great trustee anyway. So if you're speaking really accessible, inclusive language, I would think that talented middle-class white men would still continue to apply as they do in their droves, whilst others are openly engaging with the process as well.
Great, thank you, Michael. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael has captured it really well. It is about the organisation and the skills it needs, and that wide range of skills it needs, and going into wider pools of talent which exist and where the organisation hasn't looked to tap in before. And I think it's if you can set out the case based on your strategy, based on where the gaps are, and based on the fact that actually you're not representing the broader community in which you operate, then I think that that's perfectly legitimate. And yeah, and I think when you get people applying, whether they're white or black or Asian, then you look at the applications and you decide where you need it to get a balanced set of trustees, and the same applies to staff and volunteers as well.
Thank you. Also, I'm aware that we've obviously come to 1 o'clock. So for those who can't stay on the webinar, obviously understand. We've got a few more questions, so I will keep on going. But just for those who can't stay, it will be sent out within 24 hours, so you can watch the rest of the questions back as well. So next question I thought was a good one. What are the key skills needed to become a trustee? So we did kind of cover this a little bit before, but any sort of key skills which you would say? Ambreen?
The first question that came to mind is curiosity, which is quite a skill, you know, genuinely, you know, so we all bring different skills, whether it's policy, research, finance, legal, whatever your practice experience is, but you take that into an organisation. And an organisation could be looking for any one of those or multiple of those. So I guess look at the list of skills they're looking for. But it is a state of mind. It's asking the why question. It's asking the other thing that I was thinking about when Michael was talking about young trustees, it's that when you've been in an organisation or in those types of organisations for many years, sometimes you can sit there and go, oh, well, this is the way it's done, isn't it? So you don't question it. And a fresh mind and a fresh perspective goes, well, why do we do it like that? And somebody goes, oh, because we always have. And that's never a good reason. So I guess that curiosity is a really key one for me. And just wanting to dig deeper and understand why something happens, and inevitably things will flow.
Yeah, and just to add to Anne-Verine's point, is how can you develop that muscle of curiosity? Is you don't have to become a trustee to do that. You can read charity news into that world and just keep an eye out on, like, if a charity's gone under, understanding like why did that happen, what could have stopped that from happening, what trends were happening that would have been helpful for them to foresee. So asking yourselves those questions. I know a group of aspiring young trustees regularly meet up and they'll discuss like current affairs and issues in the charity sector and think about, if they were on a board, what would they have done differently? And that's a really great way of building up that skill.
Thank you, Mita. Another question, have any of you ever had a negative experience as a trustee, or where your views from someone from the Black, Asian, minority ethnic group background were negatively received?
I don't mind kicking off.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to take up too much space, but I remember once when I was a trustee and I was filled with imposter syndrome, and that's the biggest thing that people like often report in terms of imposter syndrome. And there was this, and so I gave a really nervous speech in one of my performances, like places I was meant to be, and there was another big conference coming up, and someone said to me, I don't think you might not be the right person to give a speech here. And I went from a place of being like, oh no, like, do I belong here? Am I good enough? To like, wait a minute, did you just tell me as like a white middle class man that I should not be taking up space in here? And it came, actually, I got a bit angry, and that anger was actually really helpful in feeling kind of confidence in my role, because I realized that not everyone, like, I would never tell somebody that from that background. And I would never ever do that. And I realized having that same kind of confidence in myself that I would give to other people really fueled my ability to get through that. So I think, I don't want to pretend that the world is the place that we want to be in, but starting from a place of understanding why you're needed and how you would want to treat other people helps you kind of fulfill that sense of understanding your place and what role you want to get, and where there's justified anger, and how you can feel that anger into ensuring that you don't internalize it.
Yeah, Mita, I think I might have actually experienced exactly the same thing in the same organisation from potentially the same person.
Oh dear.
But I was removed from giving the rest of the speeches at what I think you're talking about the year after it happened to you. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's shocking to hear that, and I suspect it still goes on. And I'm not entirely sure whether it's because of that I'm Black trustee, or whether I'm just a really bad trustee. But I've been on a couple of boards where, against the groupthink thing, where I thought one thing and the other 9 thought something else, and that spanned both when I started off as a trustee, and happened to a lesser extent, but one can still see it. And there was a board where I took a decision which I didn't agree with, which the rest of the board thought was a great decision, and I didn't, and I adopted a minority view. I said I don't agree with it, and as it turned out, I was right not to agree, because the decision they took, it proved to be entirely wrong. And so I think you've got to be bold enough to take that decision. It's not easy, but I think it's avoiding that group thing. It's having allies on the board and different people on the board who will support you and who will back you up. And I think that's very important. Hence, no point just having one person on the board who's different. It's about changing the whole dynamic of that board.
Thank you, Malcolm. So next question, if we are wanting to be honest and suggest that we want to improve our diversity, what is the right or wrong terminology to use to identify the groups? Is it BME is just to say improving diversity, or are there other words we should and shouldn't be used marketing to attract these underrepresented groups?
I'll kick off. I don't know if I have the right answer or wrong answer, but I'll kick off. I guess, I mean, the terminology is always changing, and I guess you need to think about what it is that you're looking for. If you're looking for Black and Asian groups, then just say that. If you're looking for communities, I mean, so people have started talking about minoritized groups. So it's, you know, I'm not in the minority, I've been minoritized by others because of the context in which I live. So I guess it really is thinking about what it is you're looking for and stating that. I think that there is an ongoing dialogue about the acronym of BAME. You know, is it grouping everyone together in one big homogenous group, when actually the diversity of people's experiences is very different depending on their own personal backgrounds and where they're coming from. So I think the general trend is to try not to fall into categories which homogenize people into communities which are false communities, and to name it in the way you depending on what you're looking for. But I'm sure Malcolm probably has more to say on this than I do.
Now, what do other people think first before I offer any thoughts? Mita, Michael, what are your thoughts?
I'm keen to hear what you think, Malcolm.
Like a game of tennis.
I've been on I was actually on the Kivo panel where they were looking at advisory. Kivo is the umbrella body for CEOs in the sector. I was on a monitoring group, and they agonized for about a year on the terminology. And eventually, and they had BAME initially. They moved on to Black and Asian because it's more specific, and they took out the ME bit. And I think for me that was correct, because that focused on where the challenges, where the barriers, where the issues are. I agree with Ambreen. BAME is an awful term. When I used to be a civil servant, and it was a generic term that we used to cover everything. And it was a term coined by people in power. So it's no longer relevant. For the work I'm doing, I'm saying Black and Asian, and I've said it in the guide I'm producing this year, because they're the groups actually that are most discriminated against and most overtly seen to be underrepresented on charity boards. So I'm not at all ashamed about using the term Black and Asian. Even within those terms, there's a whole range of definitions and subgroupings, but you've got to start somewhere. So, and I've got a disclaimer in my guide which says where people use BAME, that's the term that they use. It's not my term. A lot of student networks are described as BAME. And yeah, so I think it's time that that term was stopped being used.
Thank you, Malcolm. So the final question, I am a charity CEO, and I am keen to encourage the board to recruit a greater range of experiences. Does anyone have any recommended resources for recruiting through our community of ambassadors? Aside from putting out an advert, any ideas about encouraging applications from those less competent to put themselves forward?
Yeah, I can go. So I think the first thing is making sure that you are aligned in your purpose and vision. We have a board conversations toolkit that is free and can support with that if that is helpful. But we always find that if you rush into diversity without understanding the reason of why, and if you're here, it shows that you're committed to the reason of why. Being the whole board being committed into that reason of why really helps the language and the answers to potential applicants that they're hearing from you, and also just helps you to retain those applicants as well. As Malcolm mentioned, those statistics reflect a lot of people leave as well once they are into those roles. So that's the first step. And then the second step in terms of recruitment is a lot of the times just meeting people who are friendly and kind and really want you in these spaces removes big barriers, and also demystifies what a trustee does. I've spoken to a lot of organizations who are really wanting particular target groups, and when I speak to people within that demographic, they say, oh, they would never want me, or someone like me could never do that. So I think that real connection and human desire to like that human connection to say, I'm a friendly person, you would be so welcome here, and also why we so badly need you, and if it appears like we don't, like that's reflective of broken systems and we're willing to change is a huge part of it. And then, as I mentioned before as well, connecting with those groups by going into those spaces and paying people who from those communities to spread that message. And if you're having a webinar, for instance, for them chairing those conversations is really powerful.
Thank you, Mita. What else? Malcolm?
Yeah, I can't add much more to what Mita has brilliantly said. It takes time as well. So I get people approaching me and saying they want diverse trustees by a deadline of 3 weeks. It's not going to happen in 3 weeks. You've got to build that rapport, that relationship with people that you want to bring in. And I've said it takes 3 months, it takes 6 months. So you start that raising awareness of who you are, of what skills you need much earlier on, at the beginning of your diversity conversation. Well, 1 or 2 people I know are doing speed dating, where they're bringing in local communities to talk to charities and vice versa. And that's quite a helpful tip. Or they're having awareness raising sessions online where they're just having a conversation about what they're looking for, who they are, and people can then ask questions. So I think there are ways of trying to build that relationship between you and the communities that you're trying to engage. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Malcolm. Oh,
Malcolm. I was just going to come in right at the end there, just to say that in addition to, you know, in terms of, I mean, Mita and Malcolm have spoken about, you know, having sessions where you're absolutely build those relationships, and how do you find a group of people that might apply. And I think that when you think you've found your 10 golden nuggets, or, you know, people that you're really keen to apply, one of the things that I reflected back on in my experience of the trustee recruitment process, well, actually it was quite a nurturing process. So, you know, it happened to be through a recruiter in the instance that I got my trustee role, but, you know, the trustee would check in with me, which made me think, well, actually they're keen for my application. So there is something about the way something is recruited, and you showing an interest in that person and inviting their application and supporting them through that application, which makes me think that if at any point I got imposter syndrome, or life got busy, or I just lost confidence and thought, well, this isn't worth the time and effort, because it takes a lot of time and effort to do good applications, then knowing that actually somebody's actually checking in, so they clearly do want me, they really do want my skills. So I think there is something about the way you recruit and that relationship that you build that actually invites someone in, rather than goes, well, it's up to you, you know the opportunity, come in if you want to, and you may not get the best person in with that latter experience.
Thank you so much, Ambreen, and thank you to everybody who sent in a question as well. So before we wrap up, a little task for aspiring trustees. If you could write in the comments one thing that you think you might need to support you in being a trustee, that would be really helpful for us. So I'll just wait for a couple of minutes if we do get any. So any comments, one thing that you think that you might need to support you in being a trustee. Let's just see if any of those come through, but whilst that happens, so any sort of further information into becoming a trustee, the wonderful Helen has just shared a link in the box. The first one is to Malcolm's Black and Asian Trustee Network, and also to Mita's Young Trustees Opportunities board. So there are some really good tools in there. So please save the link before we do cut off. And I just want to say a thank you to all our wonderful speakers today, Malcolm, Mita, Michael and Ambreen. Also, thank you to Helen, who you haven't seen, but has been working really hard behind the scenes to make this webinar a success. And a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today. As said before, it has been recorded and all will be sent automatically out to you in 24 hours. So for anyone who does wish to watch this back or share with anyone who you think may benefit from watching it, please do. But to everyone, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you.